there, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Train Crash podcast. Today, we're doing our second in our series of controversial opinions. Now, before we actually get into this, there's a little caveat that we always start these with, and that is these are just some opinions. They're not necessarily our opinions. We're going to discuss them. If you agree with them, let us know in the comment section below. If you don't, again, let us know in the comment section below. And yeah, we'll have a bit of a discussion about it. It was really good last time, hearing people's different opinions on things and things like that. And hopefully we can replicate it this time. So we may as well get straight into it. And that is, as railway modellers, we are guilty of either modelling a prototype or our impression or an idealised version of the prototype that we originally sought out to model.
Yeah, what a wonderful opinion from Facebook. I think sometimes creating a model that's 100% accurate is near impossible or incredibly difficult, no matter how much money, resources, time we throw at it. And I think that's something we've both thought about, isn't it? We both love to have something that's super accurate, or whether it's not an accurate layout, but a piece of stock that's really accurate, or something that's just very similar to the lifelike counterpart. But I think for most people, having something that creates an impression of it is much easier, isn't it? I think we both that with both of our layouts, don't we?
Yeah, exactly. I've kind of always kind of set myself out, or at least since I've been doing modelling properly in inverted commas. Go follow my Instagram, Heaps and Colliery, if you want to see what I class as modelling. But no, I think
one.
ever since, there's going to be loads, let's face it. But yeah, I think as a modeller, we all have kind of like modelling outlooks, which I think will get its own podcast about how we came to ours and what we think about our own things. And I've kind of always lent towards this impressionism of it, because I don't necessarily model an exact prototype. Very rarely in stock do I, or on my layouts I don't. But I want to give an impression of a hard-working loco, let's say, or a quayside that's part of a colliery system. So I think the impressionism is a lot easier to do, and it can open a lot more doors. It can open a lot of impressionism within itself. So, like, how would a loco have ended up somewhere? Or why would something have looped the way that it did? Did it get rebuilt at some point in its life, or something like that? I think that's maybe due to a lack of interest in exact prototypes. On my own behalf, I don't necessarily find exact prototypes that interesting unless they have an interesting story behind them. And I think a lot of people are guilty of that. We all probably have something that's completely out of region, or that doesn't fit with our regional modelling space in our collection because it's nice.
I was worried you were going to bring up my class 22 then for a moment. Genuine concern.
No, I was going to mention the Warwell that you've got.
Yeah, that's way out of era, but I've kind of backdated it with just a bit of black paint covering up some of the colour details and the newer details and modifications to them. I think what makes this opinion controversial is when one person says this one's right and this one's wrong, or this one's better than the other, or this one should be done more often than the other. I think that's often the case when people say, we should always be striving for 100% realism, or as realistic as you can make it. But I think for both of us, we've not got massive spaces. Admittedly, we've not got massive budgets either. We can't build a garage in the garden for a massive 20-foot roundy. What we can do is we can, with what we've got. I think that's almost an improvised way of looking at the impressionist side of it. So, for example, Distillery Yard, one of my layouts, inspired off about 5 different distillery systems. Something I'd never be able to model. There's 5 different distillery systems. They're massive, vast, very different, complex systems. But to wire it into one layout with 3 points, 4.5 foot long by 1 foot, including a fiddle yard, that's something I was only ever going to be able to do with an impressionist approach. I think that's something every modeler accidentally falls into, though. I think we always want the most operational interests. We always want the kind of most interesting dramatic scene we can get into a layout. And I think also, if you buy points, you are kind of going down an impressionist route because they're so much smaller and more compact than, say, for instance, like if you were to make your own point. I know there's the bullhead range and stuff like that. It's a bit more to scale. But actually, most of the outs out there are impressionist by nature by using set checkpoints.
Exactly, and it is funny you mentioned the debate about it. It sometimes gets mentioned when where there's a bit of stock, and it's an impression of what something would be. For example, my Drummond 700 that I'm working on at the moment, I'm using pictures of not only Drummond 700s but also out of region locos, because the locos are Southern Region loco, which in theory, in my mind, is in the Midlands. Didn't happen in real life, but locos did get moved about, and certain things happened to them. Some of them were looked after, some of them weren't, because they weren't as good as the local variants. Some crews liked them, some crews didn't, and that affected the care they got given when in yards and things like that. And I think it kind of makes it more interesting. You find out more about the model rail, about the real railway world, by looking at a broad range of prototypes. Like looking at on my railway shelf at the moment, if you ignore the Thomas the Tank range, I've got a book. I've got no idea when it was published, but it's British Railways Steam in the 1950s. It's a brilliant book full of pictures and things of really odd prototypes and generic ones in the 1950s in black and white, so you can get an idea of what the locos were like in that time. It's really weird because there's some pictures of like Great Western Manners and they look really, really pristine. Obviously, working in black and white, but you've got an idea of what they'll look like in colour. And there's some of them which look really, really trodden down and really, really hard worked. And it's obviously, unless you're going for an exact replica of that loco, I think we all try to invent our own little stories around that suit what we want to do with our models.
Yeah, and let's be honest, the prototype changes every day. Locos never look the same, 2 days in a row. They either get muckier or cleaner or sort of the same, but they never stay exactly the same. And the same for the scenery around you, whether the seasons changed or buildings decayed or buildings were built. The prototype really changes a lot every day. That's why I think the impressionist approach is so much better than an idealist approach for most layouts and most modelers. Yeah, I think it suits everyone's modeling style. It's more relaxed. You don't need to think as much about the prototype as much. I think that just really suits most modelers.
Exactly, and we're both modelers with a very much industrial lean, and the way a locomotive looked and was looked after varied so much between even things that were nationalised, like collieries. Some collieries had a really, really solid cleaning team and things like that, whereas other ones looked like they didn't necessarily care about the stock. But again, that could have been because the picture was taken at the very end of a shift when it was about to get scrapped. Or it could have just been the day after it had been cleaned, after it had been into the main works for an overhaul or something like that. There's so many things, like the pictures that we use almost tell a story in themselves, and I think by using them as reference, we almost help to expand that story probably much beyond the initial photographer ever imagined.
Absolutely. Moving on to maybe a different controversial opinion, how do we feel about ready-to-plant buildings, and do we feel that they create a sameness between layouts? Because I, for one, kind of do agree with this opinion that they do create a bit of a sameness for layouts. And are they a bad thing as well? That's kind of the end of it.
I think there's a distinction to be made there. I think there's a difference between it being bad that we have ready-to-plant models from the likes of Oxford, from the likes of Bachmann, is it Scenecraft that Bachmann do, and Scaledale under Hornby, and I think there's a couple of others as well that makes stuff like, I think Nosh do some, and I think Fowler do some as well, although they're more European in form. Yes, it makes some layouts look samey, but I'd argue some layouts are inevitably going to be samey. If you do an idyllic Great Western branch line, it's probably going to look quite similar to the next person who's done an idyllic Great Western branch line set in the same sort of time period in the same season. And unless there's like defining a layout characteristic, which is something we've discussed about implementing on our own layouts, whether that be some water or whether that be a massive bit of landscaping or something like that, I think it's inevitable that layouts will look similar if they're based on similar things. And it always loops around to that impressionism that we mentioned about a minute ago, is that it's our own impression, and inevitably some of our impressions will be the same. However, the ready plant buildings can make a lot of layouts seem similar, especially when you've got buildings that are based on specific prototypes, such as the ones up at the North Yorkshire Moors.
Mm-hmm.
You'll be the expert on the North Yorkshire Moors. Which one's got? I think they were Hornby buildings made of them.
Yeah, it's Gothland and a little bit of Levisham as well, I think.
Because they were for the Harry Potter range, weren't they?
Yeah, it was. So they filmed Hogsmeade Station at Gothland, but they've done the Gothland building so many times now, and like the Good Shed and the other Signal Box as well there as well. They've done it quite well.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to when they do some Keighley and Worth Valley things for like Peaky Blinders. Anyway, we'll kind of extenuate the point that we were making, and that is it's inevitable that we are going to have samey looking layouts, and I think sometimes ready-to-plant buildings almost accentuate that a little bit more, but I don't think it's a bad thing because not everybody's going to want or be able to build a kit, scratch build a station building, signal box, whatever.
That is true. I guess to me, this problem mostly occurs when I go to exhibitions. I see a T&D layout, I see another one, and they all use the same Bachmann Scencraft engine, like maintenance TMD shed. They all have Hornby Scaledale terrace housing against the back. They all have Metcalfe walling. I don't think it's critical of anyone's skill level. I just think sometimes the availability of these buildings can limit people's imaginations quite a lot. Knowing that for 30, 40, 50 pounds, whatever, you can get this building and you can get a row of terrace houses as well in the back, so whatever. I mean, a bit more expensive than that, but it can sometimes limit people's imaginations to what could be there because there's bits that are so conveniently available. Most model shops will sell pre-made resin buildings, and maybe that limits people's creativity sometimes. Maybe it doesn't help create their own. That's be more personal and that sort of front. For me, I always like to make my own buildings because it keeps the cost down. And allows me to do things differently and incorporate them differently into the landscape. But yeah, I've stalled there again.
I suppose the counter argument for what you're saying there is a lot of TMDs were very similar in form and in location. Excuse me. So a lot of them would be near terrace houses using a similar sort of building. Does that necessarily make them bad? And not necessarily, in my opinion, because they are representing a prototype, and if that's what they want to do, that's what they want to do. But as you say, I think sometimes like a creative spin on it can maybe be lost in that, but maybe it makes them creative spins a little bit richer. Like there's a TMD layout, a motive power depot rather, on YouTube. There's based on a Great Central design, and it's got a front on it a bit like a house does. It's really, really nicely done. And it's because it's different to what I've seen before, it kind of makes it stand out a little bit more in the head.
Yeah, those are very valid points. I guess I've got quite a valid point behind saying a lot of TMDs had similar looking structures, probably the same architect that designed them all in the first place. But I mean, maybe I'm just being critical. I'd like to see some simple tweaks. I think a simple tweak, maybe painting front doors different colours, different windowsills, putting a wheelie bin out some of those houses, maybe rebranding some of the shops. Stuff would just be a nice twist spin on buildings that are already available. I think it is quite good they're accessible because a lot of people might not have the skills yet to build a kit. I think the Metcalfe kits are a fantastic way to bridge that gap. And actually, people that may not be physically able, maybe maybe they can't build a building or something like that, having off-the-shelf items to allow them to complete a layout is actually quite accessible part of the hobby for everyone to enjoy.
Exactly. And you kind of touched on it there. People rebuilding it's a more creative spin on it, isn't it? I've seen a couple of like specific stations, like from ready to plant raids, quite recognisable ones. But like people have added toilet blocks to the side of them, maybe converted the top to something else. It's quite. I saw a really, really good use of. I'll try and find it for the video, but the chance of me finding it is ridiculously small. The Lynston and Barnstable station that somebody's made ready to plant, but with a bit of repainting, and I think it had a toilet block added on one side. It looked like almost unrecognisable, unless I think in the caption it said what it was originally. And just in passing, I don't think I would have placed it as that Lynston Barnstable ready to plant station building.
I think that's made by Bachmann Scencraft. I know what station building you're talking about. It is incredibly sought after, and that is true because sometimes I say when I make my own buildings, I don't follow a strict prototype. I don't go to a site and take site photo locations, whatever. I don't do that. I not more build as an impressionist from an impression of the area, and actually be able to buy a pre-made building of an exact location if you want said station, whether that's Goathland or this Linton and Barnstaple station that both escapes our mind for the name. It's Woody Bay. That's what it's called. It's called Woody Bay. I just remember that now. Actually, having something that's perfectly accurate of that station is actually quite useful. And actually, if I was modelling those stations, I'd probably have nothing against using one of those pre-plant buildings because they're going to be more accurate than what I could make. They're all square, and the racing buildings do look fantastic. I've got to give it to them. The finish they come from the factory is actually quite realistic, I think.
Exactly. Now, on to our next point, which I think's particularly interesting, considering that at the time of recording, Hornby's coaches have just hit the range. There's two things I want to talk about the Hornby six-wheel coaches. Number one, is it good business that they nicked Hatton's thunder with pre-grouping types of coaches? And number two, is it okay that they're doing a generic prototype with different liveries on rather than doing an exact replica of, say, a Stroudley design?
Do you know what? I mean, I'm going to group Hattons and Hornby in this. They've both done, though Hornby did steal Hattons probably. The idea of having a design that's sort of a generalized design, I think we're both really big fans of that. We've kind of said that before about pre-grouping designs, that actually having a design when there were so many small companies, so many small variations, so many big variations as well, but so many variations, actually having a generic sort of overarching design, which is what these coaches are, is actually a really good idea. I think something we both quite support. It does mean that they're not as prototypical as they could be, but they're quite close. If you're really keen to modify them, you probably could modify them if you're that keen. But actually, there's not loads of photos of that era with those coaches. And actually, I think as long as they get the livery spot on, I don't think there's that much need to worry about if the roof vent's from the right place or if the angle of the coach roof is perfect. To me, I'd accept them as if I'd accept them as that pre-grouping coach if I saw it in that pre-grouping livery, and I probably wouldn't look twice at it because it just looks right, especially with the livery on it.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting to mention about lining and things because in the Hornby teak ones that have got released recently, the lining doesn't match the moulding on the body, so it's a bit more square, whereas the moulding's a little bit rounder. Which again, it helps make the model look different to how it will be in other liveries. The argument is that Hornby have based it on a Stroudley coach with the brake van with the ducats and things, which is quite distinct, quite uncommon, but equally it's representation. And if you'd have said 3 years ago, oh, you're going to get some ready to run pre-grouping coaches, I think a lot of people are biting your hand off. The other thing I would like to say, just before we go on to is it right business for Hornby to do this, I see a lot of people buying both Hornby and Hatton's variants, considering how, as you mentioned, the variation in types, liveries, condition, rebuilt conditions and things of these coaches. It's probably going to look better if you have a mixed rake of both Hornby and Hatton's coaches. If you are going for something that is nearly accurate and almost an impression like our first point was.
We've planned this podcast so well. We've got this first point that just links everything else together so beautifully. That's a really good point. I hadn't even considered that actually. How people might actually select a natural variation of the coaches. Maybe it's going to benefit both manufacturers. But I don't know. Personally, I can still see people sticking to either or just because people like matchingness sometimes, especially if the coupling heights are all the same and people might prefer those two different lighting systems as well. People might want to keep it simple with just one type. But I do get where you're coming from. I think that's a really, really valid point. Do I think it's right business? I mean, it is capitalism in the 21st century. You can rip people off with their ideas. Otherwise, there'd be no market competition, would there? I don't think it's a nice move. I think we'd want to see manufacturers being kind and courteous to each other, especially in this sort of time of where, I mean, most model businesses are going up in sales rather than going down, but still, there's a risk of people not having the same amount of money to spend. I don't think it's a nice thing to do, but do I have a direct problem with it? Not necessarily. If I worked at Hattons or if I worked at Hornby, I'd probably be quite annoyed at the other manufacturer, thinking this is going to maybe threaten my career prospects or a job if they don't sell and hit financial hardship, whatever. But I don't have a direct problem with it. It's not good business, but it's good business if you get me. It's a good strategic business move. It's not a nice business move.
Yeah, we've seen Hornby do it before, haven't we? There was the Cavalex with the Class 91s, Oxford
Terriers.
with Dapol with the Terriers, Oxford Rail with the radial tanks, the Adams ones.
They basically cheated Hattons and Bachmann out with relaunching the Lima 66s for stupidly cheap prices of like £66, whatever. And you could get a TTS one for under 100, which is ridiculous. But
then the argument about that was if your chances are, if you want a Hornby one, you're not going to be. You'd if you cared about the exact prototypical detail, you'd wait for a Hattons one. Some sort of thing with the Terrier.
I didn't think actual boxes falling off was prototypical though.
That's very sly. That's very sly.
Sorry, Hattons. Sorry.
We can't get into this because both of us fancy a Garrett at some point in time, and the build quality on them wasn't any better. Although interesting, that was a Hattons product as well originally, I think.
It was through Helsham, wasn't it?
I can't say anything because my Andrew Barclay is fine. The only issues with it have been what I did with my own ham hands.
I can't believe you bring up the Barclays because I've got an ill opinion on mine.
Okay, we'll move on. We'll move on so we don't get sue-ship from Hattons. Hattons, if you would like to spread the olive branch of peace, feel free to send us both a 14 and 16 inch Barclay and a P-Class because they're quite funky. Obviously, if you want to extend the olive branch of peace, and we will gladly take them. And what we'll do is we'll do really biased reviews of them on YouTube.
Here is I wondered where you were going with that link. Here we are.
I'll make Discord structure, mate. It's the only thing I've learned at uni.
Wow. That's tell 1.5 years has not been wasted. Anyway, what were we talking about?
Okay, I'll move on. Should reviewers, both in paper and in online form, be given free or cheaper samples of models to review? And I'm not talking about engineering samples where they go, "Oh, isn't it nice? It'll look good when there's paint on it." I'm talking like locos that have been sent to them for free or at a heavily discounted price. Number one, should that be a thing? And number two, should they say it? Now, by law, you have to say if you've been sent something for free. So obviously that discounts that point. But should they be done, and should they make more of it when they do their final review points, say a score or whatever?
I just want to know who doing the impression of by saying, "Oh, it would look better with paint on it." But we'll probably never know.
Like to think of it as much like a Hattons or a Hornby 4 or 6-wheeled vintage coach. It's a hybrid of impressions of about 3 or 4 people that I can think of off the top of my head.
I can think of some impressions that you're doing particularly strong off there. Oh, look, a Class 25. Oh, no, sorry. That was low blow again from Luke. He's on a roll. I'm going to move on from that. And do you know what? Yes, but they really should include that. I think they need to weight it more sometimes. Because let's be honest, if we were both sent a loco for free, we would sing its praises high. Even if it was a DJM J94, we'd still find something nice to talk about with it. We wouldn't just slate its shockingly poor running qualities and question
How many years have you had that?
I think I've got 2016. 5 years.
He's fuming.
It's the year I built Crompton, which was the year I sat my GCSEs, which would be 2017, I think. So 4 years. But I bought it. Yeah, it would. I don't know, 4 or 5 years. 5 years. I don't know. Too long, really. It's rubbish. I'm surprised it still works. That doesn't. That's the fun side of it. But it looks nice, and that's what we'd find space to talk about. If we got something sent for free, you're naturally gonna be happy with it, aren't you? Because if I go to the model shop and I buy a Loco and I'm not impressed with it, I can't to us. I didn't do this with the Gen 94, but I'd probably return it, wouldn't you? If you get it sent for free, there's nothing to complain about. Because if you think about it, I don't know if you do this, you probably do, because I do it. When I buy a Loco or something, I always think, that's only hours of work at my hourly rate that's cost me. And you don't have to do it with the free Loco. You don't have to think. You have to imagine in your head the amount of work that's going into buying and affording that. I think that's often overlooked because you naturally buy something that's free. There's the phrase that free food is always good food, and I think we could just apply that to Locos. I would still take free food and a free Loco. So,
if anybody wants to do so, our social media links are in the description. But yeah, I think it's because obviously we run Train Crash Models. I say we, it's the royal we. You run Train Crash Models, and obviously I get sent samples of things, and you obviously make it, but we don't make any falsities about products. We don't say they're the best products ever made, although the Children Wagon is amazing.
Oh, thanks.
Link in the description.
Plug. That was perfect. Even that discourse. Uni has taught you well. Yeah, I mean, from our standpoint, when we've sent kits out, sample packs, free kits out before, we've made sure they know they're getting it for free. We've not just randomly sent them some free stuff and told them to lie about getting it for free. And something we have got back is honest feedback from it before, haven't we? We've learnt really valuable things from someone taking it and reviewing on YouTube. When we first played the Children Wagons, before it was released, the first body mold wasn't as square as it could be. So one of the things we did do is the video came out, we responded to the feedback, and we changed it. And that was really valuable. And I think that's important because they knew they got it for free. They could still criticize us on different parts. I think it was a really good review, actually. But I think a lot of YouTubers and model people miss that over. The fact that they're free and they feel maybe someone's scared to criticize if they won't get the samples back again in the future, or if they will fall out with the company. If they write a big review saying not the Batman packets, the Hornby. If someone came out with a review and said the Hornby packets were rubbish, I mean, obviously they aren't. They're fantastic. They might be afraid that Hornby would be less inclined to send them more free stuff in the future. I think that's just they want to be friends with them because they sent them free stuff, innit?
Yeah, and maybe it's us being a little bit cynical when we look at the model railway scene. And I think it happens in all scenes when somebody gets to the point where free things get sent to them, or they get links from websites and retailers and things like that, with like links where things work out cheaper and things. If you use their link in the description, I think that maybe muddy the water. You've just got to trust the reviewer to give you that honest opinion. And I think that's probably why you should take all reviews, apart from the ones on the Oliver Roller YouTube channel, with a pinch of salt, because the ones on the Oliver Roller YouTube channel are the best reviews to have ever been on YouTube.
And they don't have any affiliate links. That's the thing with affiliate links, is they get a percentage of the money, don't they? If they use their discount code, or if they use your affiliate links, the people that produce a video get some money from it. And that is inherently biased, isn't it? Because obviously you're going to want to make money, so you might just accidentally overlook some flaws of the model or anything like that. Now, I am proud to say, bring it back to the J94, they don't have that many great reviews, which I think, be some honest reviewers out there. I think it is just a natural problem, isn't it? You get it free. I mean, think about it when you're in school. You're always the friend with the kid that gave out free sweets, weren't you? So
there was no kids at my school who gave out free sweets. They always charged you.
Well, okay. Yeah, very good friends then. Friends with inverted commas. That's a random tangent, but maybe a valuable.
What we can do is we can link that very good metaphor
Oh, here we
further
go. Another
onwards.
link. Okay. Which point are we going to link this to now then?
From getting something cheap, we're going to move on to getting something very expensive. And no, we're not going to get onto the fact that the Hornby 00 range is really, really expensive second-hand and on the Hornby website, because quite frankly, if you want a collector's item, you pay a collector's price, the way it works. We're going to move on to people reselling things, but not like collector's items, although this technically was. People reselling things for an extortionate price. And the one that comes to mind particularly for this, which actually was a collector's item, I've forgotten how many numbers were sold of it, but it's the Hornby Tom Moore, which was a charity item. The NHS Tom Moore 66 from Hornby.
Can I just really quickly apologise to the audience for just going on a really random, out of context tangent about paying full price on the Hornby website for collector's items? This is from a conversation we had earlier. I won't go into too much details, and I won't expose any names, which is unusual the way this podcast has gone. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of outrage, wasn't it? Some people had bought the Tom Moore 66s from Hornby with the apparent intent of waiting for everyone to buy one. They're obviously going to go out of stock. They're really popular Tom Moore, or Sir Tom Moore now. Yeah, people viewed him as a hero and kind of an icon. Someone that really helped a lot of people maybe get motivated through lockdown, and a lot of people valued him and what he did and what he does still. And people, there's a lot of outrage. People bought some models, maybe more than one, with the intent of selling them on, and people said that's not right because this is a charity item. Why are you trying to get for double the price or a lot more? I hate to oppose as people and make him sound like a really heartless guy, but I didn't have a massive problem with people choosing to resell. I think the thing is, if they bought a couple, maybe one or two, and decided to resell, I wouldn't have a problem. I wouldn't really have a problem with that. If they bought 10 or more, then it's obviously a selfish sort of business scheme. And they have slightly more problem with that because you're stopping 10 people from having it that they really wanted it probably. But at the end of the day, I don't have that much of a problem with it, which is a bit controversial. It's quite controversial. But at the end of the day, if you wanted that, you should have got to the Hornby pre-orders first.
And we need to start the caveat. Well, this needs its own caveat in the fact that we're not collectors. And the argument is, we had it in our first opinions podcast. In our collector negative of the hobby, we kind of focused on like the special edition liveries and things like that, and whether things sitting in display cases were being used as models, and whether that was good or bad for the hobby. I think this is maybe the kind of extension onto that, and that is the resale. And yeah, it's like it's not a hobby if you buy to resell, but equally it's their right to buy it to resell it. I think the Tom Moore one struck a bit of a what's it because it was charity and it was such an icon.
But at the end of the day, the person that bought it in the first place, the money from their purchase still went to charity. It's not as if they've robbed the charity of any money, which I think can kind of feel that way, because that feels like I'd feel ripped off if I really wanted one, and like the only way I could get one was to pay 100 odd quid for one. I would definitely feel ripped off, and I think it'd feel quite unjust, wouldn't it, as well, because they're limited editions. And I think people always come away a bit disappointed if they miss the pre-orders, though, because they did sell out super fast. And I can't remember if Hornby then increased the batch to more. But correct me if I'm wrong. But haven't Batman has Batman announced one? I think Batman's, or was it Hatton's, that's announced they're doing a Sir Captain Tom Moore 66 as well.
Yeah, it was one of the ones that's a more detailed model than the Hornby one is. As you say, I can't put my finger on whether it's Hatton's or Bachmann.
One of the two.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen a couple of people like repaint older Bachmann models into them.
Yeah.
Into Tom Moore.
There are still opportunities then to get one in the future. But then you will be paying a naturally higher price point for a new release and a new livery.
Exactly. It's kind of the reverse of what happened with the Flying Dustman, the Biffa livery 66, where the only way to get one was a resprayed Bachmann model, and then now I think Hornby, Bachmann, and Hattons have all released them, which I think kind of means that model's kind of lost a little bit of its public appeal as such, because you can get it. So what's it? Although it's a very interesting livery. Moving on from that, and on to something that I'm surprised hasn't happened more. Comparisons. Now, there was no real comparisons from what I understand between the Hornby, Bachmann and Hattons models, or not that I saw on my YouTube recommended, but there certainly has been for models such as the newer and older Bachmann Class 25s and things. Now, when you watch a comparison video, is it too much to expect the person watching that, who you're watching for free on YouTube, to have researched the actual differences between the models, between the different subclasses of the models that they represent? Is it too much to expect that? Or should, if you're putting out a comparison video, should you at least know the bare basics in the difference between the model and the locomotives that are being represented? So say with the 25s, it was like a 20/1 and a 20/3 or whatever.
Yeah, I'd just like to put you on pause there. 25s, who cares? 24s, that's where you should really know. This is, but
because there's yes,
yeah, 24s and 25s. If I'm gonna watch a review of a normal review, I trust that the person creating it has gone to the trouble of researching the prototype, to kind of get an idea of how accurate it is and how close it should be. And with a comparison, I'd expect the same thing. I'd expect the level of research. It'd be twice the work, but you're looking at twice as many models, and you probably get more reviews because it's more kind of interesting to see what manufacturers and companies do differently. I would expect plenty of research. I'd expect research, not only into looks, but maybe how different parts function, because the subclasses weren't just about having a different head code formation, different pipes in the front. They might have different mechanical modifications. I'd expect the person that was reviewing it or comparing it to know, because to point out the differences kind of objectively and with purpose and interest behind, you need to know what those parts do and why they were different. And to compare different subclasses is quite difficult as well, because like I said, there's different natural modifications. So to say one is less accurate than the other because it's a different subclass which has different parts on it is completely based on nothing.
Exactly, and I think it'll be particularly interesting when the older Bachmann 25s, the new Bachmann 25s, and the new Helgen 25s all get compared together, because I think Bachmann and Helgen, just off the top of my head, are producing different prototypes. Isn't that ironic? We've not done any research for this. But again, these are just opinions, and we aren't getting paid through YouTube. Although the argument is obviously if somebody's big enough for YouTube to pay them, then it's completely right for them to monetize their videos. I don't disagree with that at all. I maybe do have a bit of an issue with Patreons, but I think that's an issue that's always been about on YouTube when Patreons have been a thing. And it's not it's not something that I'd invest in, but equally, if you enjoy somebody's content, go use a Patreon. I just don't like it when people say they're their fans on Patreon. It just makes me feel weird.
I feel like I was bad enough venting at Hattons earlier, and then you've just brought this whole point in, engineered to, relieve your frustrations about a certain YouTuber. I thought I was bad enough.
It's not one. That was actually a collaboration of about 2, maybe 3.
About 2? Man, you're talking about so different people. I mean,
I know. Some might say
channels.
I know. Some might say I was comparing them. I've kind of got myself into a bit of a hole there.
You have really got yourself into a hole. You've been digging it for the past 15 minutes. You've been digging it since you brought the point up and introduced it. First of all, you obviously hadn't done enough research. You're talking about 25s or 24s, but that's fine.
Now you see, I did bring up 25s with the knowledge that both Bachmann and Helgen are bringing them out, and Bachmann has got an older model of it. That was the point I was making. Somebody jumped in.
I'll put your medal in the post for you, and then we'll move on. Okay.
Thank you.
Moving on. A controversial opinion. Is it impossible to model nowadays on a budget?
No, because I think we all model on some kind of budget. I think some of us have got bigger ones than others. Some of us have got smaller ones than others. In the same way that if you're into cars, you have a different budget for your car. If you're into remote controlled planes, your budget is different to somebody else's. I think that, as with all of them hobbies, it's entirely possible to get into it with a budget. We've both been on lower budgets than we're on at the moment, but equally, we'd like to be on bigger budgets than we're both on at the moment. So yeah, I think it's entirely possible. I mean, how much did Distillery, which is an exhibition layout, how much did that cost? Do you reckon all put together, track work,
To
scenery,
build,
buildings?
yeah, from baseboards to final finish, for about £125.
And
And that
how did you
is,
do that?
how did I do that? Admittedly, I saved up for 6 months to afford that, and with Christmas money in there as well. How did I do that? I cut down on techniques I didn't. I cut down on costs that thought I could do myself. So the only things I bought off the shelf was the track. I guess you could say I bought the wood off the shelf, but I bought an 8x4 sheet of plywood. It wasn't really off the shelf. It was more off the forklift truck from the timber merchant. Um, so the track was anything I bought off the shelf for it. The buildings were scratch built. The scenery landscape was cardboard, scrunched up newspaper, papier-mâché, and then static grass as well. I guess I bought that. But pre-assembled, the only thing I bought was the track. Trees were all handmade. Backscene was painted myself. Fascia was painted myself. No point motor was wire and tube. So I cut down a lot of the costs and looked at what I kind of assessed myself. What do I need the most? What can I actually build myself? And how can I budget for that? And then lots of research to go amongst different retailers. Even if I saved £1 or £2 a point, that made a massive difference to my overall kind of budget for the layout because it was very tight, and I didn't have a deadline, but I wanted to get it done fairly quickly.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's an interesting point they make about shopping about because people can get very tribal about what shop they use, and obviously, ideally use your local retailer, but sometimes your local retailer isn't going to be the cheapest about for things. But yeah, it's interesting what you mentioned about doing as much yourself as possible. It kind of links back to the ready-to-plant buildings we placed earlier because those do have a massive price tag, especially the bigger ones do. And I think that's where a lot of criticism comes from in like the new ranges. Is not only are the models expensive, although if you buy directly from a manufacturer, I think that's an easy way to save 10, 15%.
It's about 10%, yeah, and that's without any sales as well.
Yeah, that's probably something else that's probably worth mentioning is that when we buy stock, it's normally secondhand, and when it isn't, it's on sale.
Yeah, definitely, and it's normally sales with substantial reductions. I think I've bought very few locos new actually, and even then, like when I bought them, I didn't buy them from the main manufacturer, say Hornby. I bought them through, I think it was Rails, Hattons, and my local shop. So yeah, shopping about is definitely important. Like you say, wait for sales. eBay as well. We buy so much rubbish on eBay. It's unreal. I feel like every week we have a conversation. We just randomly send each other a picture of just utter crap, and like, guess what I bought on eBay? And you're like, it was only £7.50. It's just like a mouldy piece of plastic, like manky mangled loco. Like, yes, good purchase. And that's why we do actually do too much. And I mean, the other day I bought a clone trooper that was covered in like yellowed from UV light and like missing an arm for a diorama. That's the sort of random stuff we're talking about.
It looked chewed, I won't lie.
It arrived today actually. It looks quite good.
I
it looks best in the
believe that
pictures
for
on
about
eBay
10 days.
It.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. But again, that's maybe another. This isn't like a tip thing, but maybe we could give a couple of tips out. Sometimes looking at the badly listed items,
Yeah,
is a good shout.
and being prepared to buy non-runners and fix them and make them look nice. Something we have done, though it's never come to a video yet, is a £5 challenge loco. We've been
Wonder
working
why
on
that
this
is.
We've been working on this since about the summer, I think. And we've decided to build a loco and get it for a £5, and that non-runners kind of work best for that. Something I would say is when you come to building a model on a budget, especially if it's a tight budget, and like to make out a lot, buying quality over quantity is sometimes the best way to do it. There's so much cheap X everything stock in the market. We're very fortunate to have such a big second-hand market. But I think for me, sometimes it annoys when I see someone moaning about how little money they have to spend when they buy 5 Lima locos a week or whatever. That's a little bit hyperbolic. But I don't know. I think sometimes when it comes to being a budget, you have to be prepared to sometimes. It's better to sometimes buy that one better loco than it is to buy 2 or 3 less good locos.
Yeah, and that maybe comes down to your modelling philosophy. Maybe that's like our modelling philosophy is coming through there, and the fact that maybe quality is better than quantity. Whereas I suppose some people, a lot of the joy will be in having a big fleet that they can swap round and things. I think stocks may be a big thing. Like Mainline, the manufacturer, a lot of their stuff's decent quality. Rolling stock wise, the locos aren't brilliant. Unless you're looking for like rolling locos, in which case you can strip the motors out, they'd be all right. But like the Mainline castings for wagons and stuff are actually really, really good. I've got a couple in my collection that are just nice to have. That, granted, they're not like a brand new Oxford wagon, but then again, instead of being, in fairness, a very decent price for an Oxford wagon, they come in like £2-3, but they still kind of hold their own if you do a little bit of work to them. And I think weathering blend stuff, don't it?
I think from a budget, it's interesting we both have chosen industrial subjects more on the budget, which typically require less wagons, less track, less
smaller locos,
smaller, everything smaller on a small scale. And I think
Luke's used to dealing with that.
Ha ha ha. Wow, so mature. I was trying to bring it back to talking about how you can get a Sentinel and a Janus for about £50, and a Rustum for £15 more on top of that. And actually, sometimes industrial subjects are actually quite good for that because you only need a couple of wagons, let's say 5 to 10 of each. And the loco, you could have a fleet made up for £100. And if you look at that, that's the second-hand cost of a large, nice mainline loco in good condition box, probably. And so actually, sometimes going down the industrial route is quite a good way to do it. Smaller scale of everything, really. Something we both quite enjoy as well.
I think we both kind of fell into industrial modelling through a couple of different ways, but maybe the reason why we stayed there is the fact that things are maybe a little bit cheaper for if you're on a budget. I think the other thing is not to
Sorry.
No, you go.
I was going to say, look at the price of the latest industrial release from Hornby. That's going to be what, the Rustons?
The 88,
yeah, the 88. I was going to say the 48's got the latest actual model, but the 88's as well, a good example. What, £80-90 for them? Let's say 8 on a sale, 95 RRP. Look at the modern mainline locos, 180 RRP. Like it's literally half the price for the same quality of detail. I mean, I know it's tiny compared to it, but the same level of detailing and running performance. I say that they're both smooth runners, which are powerful for their size. And so actually, it's so much cheaper than trying to model a mainline sort of situation.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it's funny you mentioned power there, because maybe another controversial opinion is we expect too much from our models. So like sometimes you'll see on Facebook, my such and such a model doesn't pull 5 coaches around my layout, and then they'll attach a picture of the layout, and the layout will have an incline that's massive and not particularly well laid and ridiculously angled. In fact, Railtrack, who do the Pacer models, put something quite funny out a couple of years ago. It was a picture of like loads of uneasy track work and going up and down, and like it was all bent and that. And it was just captioned, "These are the people who send models back to us saying they don't run properly."
Yeah.
And I think it's relevant for like the power as well of a model. Is that like number one, the Rustons probably aren't going to be able to shift 5 coaches, but then again, a 48 probably wouldn't pull 5 coaches in real life.
No,
If you want your model to do that, then you're going to have to do some work to it. Maybe add some kind of extra power into your layout or something like that. If you so want to do it for whatever reason. I think sometimes maybe it's quite often that you'll see it on Facebook and the like, where people will say it's not as powerful as I was hoping, but we both have experience with locos that aren't powerful enough versus the prototype. You've already mentioned yours.
Can I mention it again? Gen 4. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to make a similar sort of point about the 13.6.1, although I don't think it's as bad as the austerity. Although the argument is that maybe the austerity in real life maybe overperforms itself. But again, it's kind of like... I'll take that. That's a compliment, mate. I'll take that.
So how is that not like...
What? Overdoing myself?
I said not like you.
Oh, I didn't hear that bit. I would have blissfully gone on for the rest of the community. Well, and it maybe comes down to that point that we made about impressionism at the very start.
We love a cyclical nature. I think that kind of brings us to a natural conclusion as well, doesn't it, for this episode? Obviously, links. I've not shouted out my Instagram yet. Shout out to links to my Instagram. If you want to see the Distillery Yard that I mentioned earlier on, it is in my Insta in the link down below. So you better go check it out. Otherwise, I'll set Oliver on you. And yeah, Train Crash Models.
I'm massive. I'm
well.
6'4". I'm 6'4", built like Akin Fenwar.
The camera is actually on. He's just so big he blocks out the sun. That's why. That's why his screen's dark. And so that's why. Obviously, links to Train Crash Models down below. Go check that out. Go support us. That's the best way you can support us as a channel. Obviously, share, make us grow, whatever. And we'll see you in the next one. Ta-ra.
Bye.
We're about to cut this bit out whilst I think of how I'm going to phrase this. Or we just don't cut it out instead of me stalling for a couple seconds.